Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this important panel on jazz and gender justice. My name is Kwezim Kize. I'm assistant professor in the Department of African and African American Studies at Duke University, and I'm the co-director of the Black Archival Imagination Lab, funded by the Franklin Humanities Institute, along with my co-director, Professor Christopher Omer, who's sitting in the audience, and he's an associate professor in the English department. I'll introduce today's panel and then leave it to our panelists to have the conversation. I'll begin with the framing of the lab, just to give you a sense of who we are and what we do. I'll introduce the speakers, and then we'll begin. What do we mean when we invoke the idea of the Black Archive? What are the conditions, genres, and modes of expression through which Black life, imagination, and desire become legible? These questions complicate how we understand the concept of the Black Archive. If Black life has variously been described through terms such as fugitivity, maroonage, and waywardness, then any engagements with its archival footprint will have to grapple with these logics. Black archives come into existence through a refraction, a restaging of epistemological temporality, a reenchantment with the material world of everyday existence in excess and beyond the library, the museum, the university, the nation-state, and other institutional infrastructures that seek Black containment. The Black Archival Imagination Lab examines how Black experiences have posed problems with regards to representation across imperial encounters. It takes seriously narrative and creative reasoning, and as such, genres such as the novel, poetry, film, photography, sound, critical fabulation, and digital spaces in thinking through the idea of the Black Archive. A key objective of the lab is to think through these genres as methodological interventions in understanding what the Black Archive is. We do not take the Black Archive to be unitary or static, but as mutating repertoires in the figuration and preservation of Black experience, as well as provocations of what the past and the future might look like. But we can also think of the Black Archive as endangered, erased, made possible, as well as constrained by the conditions of dispersal that define Africa and the Black diaspora, past and present. Today's panel engages these questions through the careers, experiences, and insights of jazz musicians. It brings together eminent practitioners and journalists of the music spanning the United States, Cuba, and South Africa. As an art form rooted in collaboration and freedom of expression, jazz music is often called to do the work of imagining democracy as a tangible, lived experience. However, how women, queer, and gender non-conforming creators sit in the genealogy of the music complicates this claim, opening up urgent and pertinent questions about the relationship between jazz and gender justice. This panel is one of many ongoing conversations about a topic whose time has indeed arrived. It also takes place under the shade of the tree that is Mary Lou Williams, herself a trailblazing figure in jazz who is more than deserving of broader recognition. We could not think of a better place in Durham to have this conversation than the North Star Church of the Arts, co-founded by Nena and Phil Freeland. This event is co-sponsored by the North Star Church of the Arts, the Mary Lou Williams Center for Black Culture, Duke's Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies, the Department of African and African American Studies, Duke English, and the Office of Global Affairs. I'd like to make an announcement that those who would like to make donations, there is a box on that end of the room, but you can also make donations to the church online as well. And now, let me introduce our speakers. I'll begin with Brenda Sisane. Award-winning broadcaster Brenda Sisane is in the South African Radio Hall of Fame. She has more than 30 years of experience in broadcast journalism, advancing the curation, programming, and preservation of jazz in South Africa and beyond. She is the founder and director of the Sprint Group companies, comprising of a specialist communications agency in the arts and a nonprofit agency using arts education to build new audiences in marginalized communities. She is passionate and writes about African culture, particularly music, and facilitates conversations with leaders in the subject. An experienced event producer, she continues to serve on funding juries for the sector, often gets commissioned as artistic director for festivals and exhibition. Collaborators include the Milan Handicrafts Expo, the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, the Prince Albert Journey to Jazz, the Music and Lifestyle Expo, South African Jazz and Health Alliance, and more. Anthony Kelley is professor of the practice of music at Duke University. Before joining Duke University's music faculty in the year 2000, Kelley served as composer in residence with the Richmond Symphony under a grant from the Meet the Composer Incorporated. Kelley was appointed as the 2021 to 2025 composer in residence for the North Carolina Symphony. His major commissions for symphony orchestra include Spirituals for Liberation and Constitutional, a Concerto Grosso, Americana, funded by the Richmond Symphony, with piano soloist Donald Fox, and The Breaks by the American Composers Orchestra. In 2024, Kelley constructed and completed composed portions of Mary Lou Williams' final work, History, with double premieres of the work by the New World Symphony in Miami, Florida, and the Duke University Wind Symphony. Kelley also co-directs and performs in the Can someone help me with it?
Improvisational?
Yes. I'm Englished out for the day today, so early. Postmodern New Blues Quartet, the Black New Blues Ensemble with clarinetist Nicholas Lewis. Welcome. Camila Cortina Bello is a Cuban-born pianist, composer, and educator whose music fuses Afro-Cuban traditions with jazz, classical, and world influences. A Berklee College of Music graduate, she has shared the stage with Paquito de Rivera, Terri Lyne Carrington, Miguel Zenon, Diane Reeves, to name a few. In 2023, she was awarded a Next Jazz Legacy Fellowship, leading to performances at the DC Jazz Festival, Ecuador Jazz Festival, and Punta del Este Jazz Festival in Uruguay. Her solo piano piece, Bravura, premiered at London's Barbican Center in 2024, and she was a finalist for the Cintas Foundation Brandon Fad Fellowship in Music Composition. She also appeared on NPR's Tiny Desk with the Afro-Cuban band Ocan. Originally from Havana, Camila's music is deeply influenced by cultural roots and global experiences. Now based in New Jersey, she actively performs in the New York music scene, continually expanding her artistic reach. And finally, the great Terri Lyne Carrington is an NEA Jazz Master, Doris Duke Artist, and 4-time GRAMMY Award-winning drummer, composer, producer, and educator. She serves as the founder and artistic director of the Berklee Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, as well as artistic director for the Next Jazz Legacy program, a collaboration with New Music USA and the Carr Center in Detroit, Michigan. She has performed on more than 100 recordings over her 40-year career and has toured and recorded with luminaries such as Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Stan Getz, Esperanza Spalding, and numerous others. Her artistry and commitment to education has earned her an honorary doctorate or honorary doctorates from York University, the Manhattan School of Music, and Berklee College of Music. And her curatorial work and music direction has been featured in many prestigious institutions internationally. Her critically acclaimed 2019 release, Waiting Game, earned the esteemed Edison Award for Music and a Grammy nomination. In the fall of 2022, she co-authored 2 books, Three of a Kind about the forming of the Allen Carrington Spalding Trio, and the seminal book collection New Standards, 101 lead sheets by women composers. This book was accompanied by the album Standards Volume 1, which won the Grammy Award for the Best Jazz Instrumental Album, and the New Standards Art Installation at Detroit's Carr Center and the Emerson Contemporary Media Art Gallery as part of the Jazz Without Patriarchy Project. Her newest album, We Insist 2025, is a collaboration with the vocalist Christy Dashiell. It is a reimagining of Max Roach's 1961 We Insist Freedom Now suite, a groundbreaking commemoration of the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation, created in collaboration with Abbey Lincoln and lyricist Oscar Brown Jr. We Insist 2025 will be released on the 13th of June this year. As Carrington observes, and I quote, "This album isn't just about honoring Max Roach and Abbey Lincoln's legacy, but also about continuing the conversation, the call for freedom and justice that resonates just as strongly today." Please join me in welcoming the speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. While Terry's grabbing her scarf, it is a bit cold. I just wanted to appreciate you and say thank you for attending church today. But we also speak about the adage of gathering when Kwesi refers to the fact that we gathered here under the generous tree of Mary Lou Williams and the legacy that she has left behind. I think a very important part of this conversation, in the sense that we are here to really imagine a world where, the jazz without patriarchy, and therefore a world where patriarchy does not define how we do things. I firstly am struck by a few coincidences. One would be just reminded by the professionalism and the response to the invitation by the panel in the middle of a big tour or launching a brand new album, Terry, to just come and have this conversation. So these minutes mean a lot. It could be 40 minutes, but the impact of that is a lot, because we continue to talk about what matters and we continue to drive the urgent agenda. So I wanted to say thank you, Camila and Terry, and thank you, Professor Anthony, for just stepping out of the room to join us. But also congratulations are in order. In fact, I was reminded last night when Terry was arriving late after we all had left, and thinking, there's a single that's just dropped in my mailbox, that this album is rolling out. So congratulations. I've been listening to it rolling through, and it's very exciting to be sitting here. A word that was used recently by a colleague about, sitting around your heroes. Jazz music is meaningful. For somebody that comes from South Africa, the echoes of this music, has reached our shores for decades. What this music speaks of and stands for is as meaningful to us. Conversations of jazz and gender and justice are conversations that are also important to us, for myself as a practitioner and many others that are musicians, that are artists in other parts of the world. And I think that's the generous nature of this music that gives us the opportunity to imagine and drive further. Perhaps because we know the work of all our panel members here, we could jump into the idea of defining and discussing jazz patriarchy, and perhaps even trying to imagine a world without that as a beginning to open our conversation. We all have our microphones right here next to us. Yeah. Maybe let me, I will not start with you. I will start at the at my extreme right, and just ask, Terry, this, imagining a world without this patriarchy, the world of jazz where you live, it takes, for me in my mind, it must take a lot of consistent action and design and redesign. And as a call that you started making, it must ask of you all the time to keep it going, but also perhaps even realizing that there's a lot of friends that are of the same mind. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm glad that it fit right in between a couple of things. Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of friends and people that are in support of jazz living up to its greatest potential. And that's really, how I see it. And when I talk to people about it, I ask, like, how can this art form live up to its greatest potential without, more involvement of people on the entire gender spectrum? And, how I think that, these conversations happen in an organic way because we all, women included, have been, over the years, accepting of this as this male art form, as this male-driven art form, and masculinity being so attached to the performance of it and the culture of it. And I was thinking about this morning due to some conversations I've had with some people over the last couple of days. If you're in an environment constantly with men, how is it that this masculinity, it's difficult for it not to become toxic at some point because there's no balance. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I've been around, in many band situations that were did not feel toxic. But I've been around the ones that do as well, and I didn't recognize that for many years. I just kind of was part of it. And so to me, it's so systemic that we really have to spend some time explaining, the problem with that to, at least, I do, to my male colleagues. And when we talk about it, because just yesterday I had a whole long conversation with a male colleague about this. And, I realized that jazz has accepted this, and it's such an embedded part of the culture that it's difficult to imagine the music any differently, sonically and culturally. And even the people that seem to recognize that women's voices should be heard, still, if you look at so many of the top bands and top artists, they're not really hiring women. They're teaching women at schools, and they're mentoring some, and sometimes advocating, but it's still harder to see this on stage. And this is an apprenticeship art form. The reason I don't get angry is because I see it as a systemic problem, or I would go crazy. I'd be mad all the time, with friends. And, it's also because I just kind of woke up to this problem, more like in the last 10, 15 years. And once I realized if I'm not part of the solution, then I'm part of the problem. So yes, there are friends and colleagues and a lot of people having this conversation because it is collective work. Luckily, Berklee allowed me to, kind of create a platform to talk about this and to, start a program at the institution that I was already teaching at. And, it definitely, I think, helped propel the conversation. But there's, so many conversations surrounding this and coming different, ways with different points of view to a degree, but everybody trying to do, the same thing. And when we talk about jazz as being freedom of expression, like you said in your introduction, Duke Ellington said that as well. A lot of people reject the word jazz for many reasons, but Duke Ellington said jazz just means freedom of expression. So I started asking myself, but for who? Freedom of expression for who? you know, and you start to, even when you have been embedded in the music to some degree, me for over 40 years, you start to realize that you're not always in the conversation, or all the extra burdens that it took for you to have any voice at all. And how would your voice have been different if you didn't have those extra burdens, and if you were able to, be supported in the same way as your male counterparts. So for me, it's about expansion all the time, myself included. How do I want to say? Expanding the mission, expanding your own ideas about how you want to contribute to this art form in many ways, not just with gender, but how you want to contribute to the art form. And having those talks, about expansion with people because I think that most jazz musicians and people that are attracted to the music are progressive, or think they're progressive, or want to be progressive. So that's why these conversations can happen, because I do think that a lot of people don't want to just, dig their heels in the sand, and they want to be on the right path. It's just going to take a lot more time, though I do see it going in that direction. I see the improvement, but it's going to take a lot more time. So thank you again for bringing this up.
Well, thank you for just the descriptive way in which you respond to this question. And I don't want to lose the particular inflection when you said that, in addressing the question, it's also a sonic exploration of what, the music could be. And I found that very interesting, and I'd like to hear more about how it would be sonically.
Say the last sentence?
Sonically, how you think the patriarchy and jazz, in imagining a different setup, how it would sound.
Well, I mean, everything we've heard that we deem great, for the most part, has been created by men. I mean, obviously we deem Mary Lou Williams great as well, but she was great because she could play like the next guy. You know what I mean? And didn't want to, didn't really want to play with women. All the great women in jazz were accepted because of their ability to assimilate. So we don't know, what the sound would be like if that hadn't been the case. And I'm sure this, goes across many disciplines. But artistically, I don't know, does it mean we play a little softer? Doesn't, these kind of typical things? I don't think so. I think there's, just a breadth of sound and what creativity can be for a person. It has to do with your experiences, what you've experienced, and how do we interpret love differently than men? Or how do we interpret freedom differently than men? I mean, that's one thing that I tried to do with the Max Roach freedom, not because I know that there was some conflict, I guess, with Abby and Max as far as her not wanting to scream the way he wanted her to scream in Triptych. And she didn't necessarily want to do that. It was his project, he was the producer, and I guess they were married at the time. So she had to do it, But how would she have expressed herself if he wasn't demanding that she scream that way? That's just a small example. So when I did Freedom Day, the first thing I did was made it a ballad opposed to this fast-driving piece. And all of a sudden, I feel like it's a different sound of what freedom means. Of course, it's more contemporary, but it does feel more feminine. It doesn't mean, there's just me and Christy, everybody else playing it, is a male musician. But yes, it does have a different aesthetic to it. So that comes from not just how we, are we aggressive or not, or these kinds of typical things, but just how we envision, a project in general, or the direction of a piece, or the production of a piece. I talked to Christy about this before we recorded it, and this could mean freedom in many ways. She said, "Yeah, this piece is sexy." I'm like, right, and women have definitely been dealing with that kind of freedom for a long time. How we can have autonomy and with our bodies and all of that. So those are the things I mean with a different sonic aesthetic in the music.
Absolutely, I get it. And I'm glad we're already here. I did imagine, this revisiting, we insist as a work, and, if it was also a statement about how to imagine jazz without patriarchy, that this work can be interpreted by other people and imagined in a way that is flattering to their original idea in every way. Camila, maybe you can tell us about how you in your space, is answering this question.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for having me here. It's such an honor to be sitting here next to all of you. I love the question because it's a question that I will have answered completely different before the Institute, before meeting Terri, and the role model she represents for me. So as you addressed in that interview where we met, I come from a country that has produced very strong piano players around the world. Like, that's what we do. We were classically trained, and it's virtuoso, and it's let's go. And that same system told me when I was 8 years old that I would never make it as a piano player, which lead my pathway to musicology, to research, to other things. And my life was kind of falling apart when I decided to go to Berklee. And when Berklee gave me that full tuition scholarship, I was crying like a baby because what did they see that I couldn't see? And I was 29-year-old when that happened. And then in that first semester in Berklee, Francisco Mela called me and it's like, you need to get into this institute. Terry's there, Chris Davis there, you must go. And my answer was like, I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with blues. I said, Camila, don't be a childish, you need to get there. And I will be forever grateful for that advice because it really was a transformative experience where I could finally shape my identity outside of my geographic borders and what everybody expects of me once I say I'm a Cuban musician. So there is a lot. I'm very grateful to have born in Cuba because we come from a very strong culture, and I love the Pan-Africanism in our journey. But there was a lot in my journey that I couldn't necessarily align with the heroes that I had in my country. And I didn't have access to other heroes until I joined the Institute. And for the first time ever, I had female mentors that were badass in the industry. Because I had a lot of incredible female mentors in Cuba. I'm very grateful to them, but they were professors. They had only their place was in the institution. And here I have people like, Lisa, I'm here like, wow, how is she doing that? What a career. And there was this sense of admiration and really feeling, this is what I want to represent in my music. It's not only about Cuban. This is the aesthetic that is the freedom in a way that I couldn't imagine it before the Institute and before you all created that impact in my life. So I'm very grateful of her mission because now I feel more comfortable about the Cubanity I want to embody in my music, which is not necessarily 100% tied to the male role models from my country. You know what I'm saying? So Cuba have exported so many piano players, but female instrumentalists, not too many. And all these things have brought my attention to, there are not too many, and there is a reason why there are not too many. That number right now is changing because many of us have left the country trying to seek for education, trying to seek, how can we improve? And I wasn't the first one in Berklee. There was a Cuban pianist spectacular before me, and she was my entry point because I met her in Singapore. I was like, if Xylee go to Berklee, I can go to Berklee. I know Xylee is a work in progress. And so there is a space for work in progress, which is another thing I remember you always talk about that in the forums. A man doesn't need to be great to get the chance to grow. A woman needs to be great to get that opportunity. And many of us, that's why you seek education, because you need to figure out. She figured out very early in her life. I could not figure it out without her and without her mission. And that's why I changed completely my mindset. And it's like, let's put the work in progress out there, because people need to see this. You know, if she didn't do that, I wouldn't have seen it. And this impact, there is already enough great people doing great music, about people with that sensibility that we have issues, especially out of America. I come from Latin America, which is 3 times as patriarchal as this country. So I know by Instagram, when I see the people that is reaching out, it's the Latin American community, that they just need somebody there. And we can be the link between Terri and that community that is not in America. So I feel so grateful to, you know, right now my music sounds like that. And I'm happy and I'm grateful, because before it was, I'm not good enough. And right now I'm good enough for my purpose, which is, you know, inspiring people to really take action into the journey they need to be. And that's my music right now, so it does have impacted. Thank you for that question.
Very well said. In fact, the echoes, you know, into the other communities. You know, when I met Anthony and spoke about Mary Lou Williams, I heard the reverence in his voice, in the terms he uses and chooses to articulate the legacy of Mary Lou Williams. Again, in our space, it gets difficult sometimes to talk about gender disparities, because it always feels like an attack on someone. A very interesting place you find yourself here right now, Anthony.
Yes, sandwiched between feminine genius is a precarious situation to be in, but appreciative of this opportunity and appreciative of your ability to communicate the way you do. So thank you, and thank you for allowing me up here, first of all. I gotta say that I just want to put in a little shout out for the concept of curiosity, because I criticize my students a lot because they don't go down the rabbit hole enough. And they'll just give us a superficial answer. And I got busted last night because I started talking about, on the Mary Lou Williams tree of history, the graphic she made in 1977, she had 96 names of people, and 2 of those names in the leaves of influence 2 of them were women. I just brought that up, and then Professor Jaji was like, well, what are the names of the women? And I was like, oops. And I was exactly like my students. So Lovey Austin, first of all, and Rose Murphy. I invite you, because I've been starting, ever since last night, I've started going down the rabbit hole. Those are some interesting stories about some interesting women that Mary Lou Williams thought belonged. Okay, and this is like this frame of, you know, these were influences from earlier in her life and even friends from later in her life. Interesting that they are out there. I gave you the names, go down the rabbit hole, okay?
Again, Lovey Austin.
Lovey Austin and Rose Murphy. Rose Murphy. Okay, so with all that said, I just gotta say, like, my experience with the music, with the piece History, was kind of a pragmatic thing, because I knew that the parts and scores were out there, and I just said, well, somebody's got to do it, so I'm going to do it. Then, of course, I'm sort of taking on the responsibility of looking into the biography of Mary Lou Williams. And I had 2 choices, right? Well, I didn't have to do choices. I just looked at both of them. Linda Dahl's book, Morning Glory, and Tammy Carnota's book, Soul on Soul. And both of them are full of the richness of your kinds of stories. And simultaneously, there are a lot of cautionary tales for any part of society about how discrimination can be pushed back against and how one can sort of navigate strategically through the worlds that she navigated through. So my curiosity opened my eyes, and I got to see the world maybe in a slightly different way. My imagination, as this panel is about, was ignited in a very different way because of curiosity. So I just wanted to put that out there. And also a little shout out to some great colleagues in here. We got Mark Anthony Neal, who's here, Maya Kronfeld, an excellent jazz pianist in her own right, and Tiff Merritt, who is running this project called the Rosetta Wright's Archive of Care, and that might be something, I don't know if we have time to come back to, but how we deal with the people that we encounter from the past and their material. She's dealing with all that, and these are mostly African-American women and jazz women and blues women, but not all. And then the question of like how Mary Lou related to someone like Mary McPartland, who's a woman, right? But Mary Lou was like, I don't like her coming to my gigs because she'll steal my ideas. So that's a complicated thing, right? So my curiosity led me to these stories, and once again, cautionary tales, but also revelations about just the experience. Ollie Wilson used to say, music is human experience transformed. And so it's coming back to what you were saying about experience being something that could be expressed in music, and that femininity could be captured in music as well. All right.
Big conversations indeed. Thank you, Anthony. You know, sitting here, I realized that this is a very friendly space. It's an enabling space for conversation. And that this music allows for that to happen, for us to address a very complex issue that is the world over. And as you said earlier, that this is a demanding task, and we still have a long way to go, you know. But there are ways in which you are doing this work, Terri. For instance, there's various programs in the Jazz and Jazz in the program that you're doing, which is intergenerational, which is also about mentorship. And I enjoyed speaking to Anthony when he was talking about Mary Lou and just mentioning that she was also a fierce businesswoman, you know. And you feel that this kind of knowledge imparted to young musicians will change the landscape somehow?
The knowledge will change the landscape as far as also being a fierce business person, or?
In the fierce business person, but also in just understanding the place and a new language of how to see each other as artists, maybe.
Okay. You have to forgive me, sometimes I'm not hearing everything, because we don't have a monitor, and 40 years of playing drums, my ears are a little shot. But yeah, I mean, the conversation is definitely evolving and changing, and you know, everything changes. That's life, right? So, I mean, technology has made things a lot easier in certain areas, easier for people to understand the business. I mean, women have been, you know, a different kind of commodity in jazz, more like, you know, the entertainer, the person in front that sings. You know, if you go back to the days of the blues, like the first recordings were women, right, singing the blues. They were also sexualized in various ways, but they also claimed their identity in, you know, in code and all of that. So we learned from that too. But I always think about, you know, Dr. Angela Davis is a dear friend of mine, and she, in her book, Blues Legacies and Black Feminism, there's a lot to be learned. And she talks about, well, I don't know if this is in the book or not, or just through conversations I've had with her, but I remember once she asked, so when slavery ended, what was the biggest thing, like the greatest thing that happened that maybe helped shaped, you know, where the music was going? And I didn't really have the answer when she asked. And she said the ability to travel. And who had that ability, though, at that time? You know, it wasn't safe for women to travel. I mean, it really wasn't safe for men to travel either. But all of a sudden, you could travel. You know, you could go to other cities, you could play your guitar, you could stand on a corner, you could go in a juke joint or a brothel, and that was not respectable for women. To, you know, only certain kinds of women were there. So, you know, when you start looking at how this all started, and I guess I'm going a little bit on a tangent because I don't know if this is even related to what you asked, but I keep asking, how did this all happen? And how can we learn from it? And how do we, you know, break these stereotypes that came into play? women were allowed to play in home, and, piano in the parlor, and then sometimes in church, but not in the brothels, So it became men's work very early, but then when the first recordings happened, there were these women standing in front of the bands singing. And so this kind of idea of a woman as a sex symbol or object started, very early. So this is what we've been kind of trying to break through ever since. Because I still, people are still shocked when I play. If they're impressed, they're still really shocked that I'm female. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how we get through that. I have my own inherent sexism, because I have to ask myself, if I see a woman and she tells me she plays bass or saxophone, do I have any preconceptions of what she sounds like or what she's going to sound like? And why am I rooting for her to sound good? You know what I mean? Why don't I just assume she's going to sound good? And these are the things that we have to, keep challenging ourselves with. And it's just, I don't know, about 100 years of work to break through. There's work to do to break through 100 years of conditioning on this. But, through technology, YouTube and the internet, and there's so many ways to do these things, and to also control our narratives and to control our business. So yes, being a fierce businesswoman back in the day, Mary Lou Williams, that's amazing. Being a composer like she was, and having people like Dizzy Gillespie and others champion her, is amazing. But we also have to ask ourselves why only a few were able, because when we think about the past, we bring up the same names over and over and over again. And there were other women. They just didn't get the opportunities. They didn't get the support. We don't know who they are unless we really do that research. So we always talk about Mary Lou Williams and Melba Liston, and maybe a Lil Hardin Armstrong, and Hazel Scott. Just, and they all have, very interesting stories. But we don't know enough about the other people that existed. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the entire ecosystem and not just the women that are on top. For instance, Lara Pellegrinelli, she's collaborating with us. She's a journalist, writer, and she's collaborating with us to do a study right now on women teaching in jazz education. So I think over 200 schools were polled, and it's pretty grim. I think there's 8% of women as jazz educators that are not vocalists, but maybe 12% when you add vocalists. But one study that she did was NPR polls that I found very interesting, which really proves the point, because she did an article a few years before that, and in the article she said, and I didn't know her as well then, but she said, if you're looking at Terri Lyne Carrington, Esperanza Spalding, and maybe she mentioned Jerry Allen, she said, that's great, but what about everybody else? And then she did this, and so that stuck with me, because I'm like, she's not necessarily criticizing me directly, but she's making a statement about my positionality in it all, right? And then she did a study saying, well, if you look at the NPR critic polls, it could look like we're doing really so much better, because now in the top 10 records of this year, whatever year she looked at, you may have Esperanza Spalding, Chris Davis, Terri Lyne Carrington, Linda Mae Han-Oh, and Mary Halverson in the top 10. So it looks like, wow, we have equity. But then when you look at the top 100, this women barely exist under there. So, I mean, those are things I never even thought about, Because it does feel like, yes, this is really getting better, but then if you look at the top 100, we're back to 8 to 10% or something. So, you know, these are things that we, you know, opportunities to constantly challenge, you know, the narrative, challenge the existing narrative, and create new narratives, and just, you know, dig into the work of understanding and helping all of this progress.
I'm glad you speak about that, particularly the ecosystem itself, because from a point of view as well, I get to realize how influential women are in the ecosystem in terms of, you know, hand-holding, caregiving, running the household, and ensuring that the creativity thrives in a musician, which is work that is not credited in any manual or anywhere, and women are doing that all the time. Friends, very progressive in the intellectual space, in the music space, but their wives and partners are mostly doing that support work.
I just want to say Miles Electric, if you haven't seen that documentary, yeah, watch it, because it talks about Betty Davis being such an influence on Miles Davis and helping him move into electronic music. And if he hadn't met her, you know, we don't know what he would have done. Of course, he was influenced in some ways by Jimi Hendrix and other people doing that at the time, but the close connection with her and where she stood in the industry at that time really was what brought him into this, I guess it remained his last iteration, you know? So, yeah, those muses, women as muses, but, you know, also the actual work, because so many men also list women as teachers. So it's like, okay, well, so we're good enough to teach you how to play, but not to play with you. You know, those kinds of things. Because I used to think that when I started teaching at Berklee, which has been 20 years now, I just got my 20-year certificate. But I used to think, well, if I kick, you know, a young man's butt in the drum studio, and he's going to have to respect women artists, but I'm not sure it actually translates like that exactly, because somehow they still go into the world and choose their peers, the people they hang out with. It's like, you know, the social group becomes their professional comrades.
We'll open it up just now for question and answer before we wrap it up. But I really wanted to speak about some of the programs that have been, because sometimes we, you know, that example you made about the top 100 is very interesting, because it does not mean that the work is not happening. It does not mean that there's impact being made somewhere, you know, and, you know, particularly this work at the moment. I mean, I recognize so many young voices that are coming through your program, for instance, and I'm thinking that's another way of empowering a new, you know, language musician who has a particular outlook about their work. And Camila, I know that you were part of that. You want to share a little bit about your experience?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. As I mentioned, I did Jazz and Gender Justice Institute while I was still in Berklee. But what was particularly remarkable was the program, The Next Jazz Legacy, that is an initiative by the New Music USA. And this was so important to me because, first of all, I was no longer a student. So sometimes, you know, schools give you this safety net that once you are out of school, it's like, what am I going to do with my life? And we are out there as professional musicians. I was already located in New York, and I remember when Terri called me, it's like, Camila, congratulations, you make it to the program. And I was like, I need to buy a piano to practice. That was the first thing. It's like, for the first time, I have an opportunity. You know, I was sharing a stage with Miguel Zenón. And Miguel Zenón is putting social media. It's like, I'm featuring Camila Cortina. This is transformative, you know. I have people calling me from all over, are you playing with Miguel Zenón? It's like, I don't think that would have happened at that particular moment of my life. And it's funny because we are playing next month for the project. And it would have not happened if it wasn't through this channel. And again, I was as excited as petrified because Miguel's music is so difficult. And it really, really pushes me like, it's time to do it. Because I got an opportunity that is like, you know, it's far away dreams. And right now, right here, how are you gonna react to them? And it was so empowering, you know, not as a Miguel Zenon Ensemble at Berklee. I was Miguel Zenon Fisher, Camila Cortina. So this opportunity to being presented as a professional pianist in New York, in Connecticut, in Boston, that was the 3 cities where we performed, it was really changing in my mindset. It's like, if they are treating me as an artist, maybe I should treat myself as an artist. And that was very important because the program also covered the business mentoring, and that was huge. Again, friends, I come from communism. I don't have to tell you how difficult it was for me to understand why a credit card is necessary in my life. I spent months trying to understand why do I need to owe money in order to be trusted in this country. So somebody like talking to me about taxes, investment, something like that, where Berklee didn't take care of that. And right now, if nobody talks about that, that's like 60% of your career right now is really relying on things that are not musical. Like you really need to work, especially if you're in a band leading position, how much you're gonna charge. If you charge in that, the musicians will respect you. It's like you have to be in all this really music business mindset, and schools are still behind schedule with that mindset. So I'm very grateful because the program was very good at opening our eyes. I remember, like with Alicia, she was like, Camila, we need to talk about numbers. How much did you charge to go to Uruguay? It's like, you cannot leave town for less than $1,500. It's like, oh my goodness. It's like, somebody's finally putting numbers. And it's such a sensitive topic. People is not always comfortable talking about numbers and money. And it was important that somebody is like, we need to talk about money. If you're gonna prepare, if you really want to see more women in those positions as artists, they need to know about the business of this thing. And I was very grateful because that program, once out of the school, was really the place, like, we need to talk about things that you have to take care of as a band leader. And I'm still trying to figure out, but now it's from, okay, we need to talk about money, and whoever is, come like students that sometimes really like, how are you making it right now as an emerging artist? Because regardless if I'm in my mid-30s, all this happened in my life, I'm an emerging artist. I've been like out of a school for 2.5 years. I couldn't be this before. I had to figure out how to be legally in this country. How, there are a lot of things that for our community just take longer. As you were saying, like, my mom couldn't allow me to be hanging in Cuban jazz clubs when I was 12 years old because it's just not safe. My friends were doing it because boys do that earlier. So I feel like for women, things are just take us a little bit longer, and we have to acknowledge that. So how can I make somebody that is in their 20s is like, open your eyes and start paying attention to these details. So this information doesn't need to reach your life when you reach my one, which is, I feel late, I feel like I'm always behind a schedule, but it's been so empowering, and I'm really grateful that the program was not only about all the musical skills that you need to succeed in a very competitive jazz world, but also about all the other information that nobody talks about, and right now is essential if you want to become an artist in today's music industry.
Great stuff, thank you. In this imagination, as we are trying to wrap up, and I'm going to give the panel an opportunity to just redirect it towards the end, we're asking a number of questions. We're asking the question of writing up the story of a deserving name and setting an example that will be followed in the future in academic institutions and other places. And we also writing a new culture of recognition where it's due, and how to do it properly, and lest we forget, And in doing that, Terri, you say beautiful things like how there are people that are involved that are not necessarily female, but that recognize this fight and that stand with you through, getting these programs done. But also, speaking to Camila was interesting for me when in our interview, she was straight up speaking her truth. And speaking to other musicians, and it's only when the pin drops now I realize that all of this came from her stay at Berklee and going through a particular program of how she actually presents herself and how she sees her own ideas. And I think 15 years, 20 years later, there'll be a different narrative about this. So I just wanted to say it's very great to be sitting here and just imagining what it would look like. Courtesy of Bale. But yeah, over to you in terms of what else we'd like to say before we open it to the floor.
just want to come back to something you said last night, Camila, that I thought was really revealing and kind of, it made me think even into this morning, because I asked you, like, what does the scene feel like as a woman in jazz today? And you said, well, you know, we all have our sort of siloed ways of playing when we're in New York, but you feel like this undergirding of community by virtue of gender. Could you like restate or tell me more about that?
Yeah, again, my time right now in New York, I'm out of a school, and because of the impact that all they had in my life, I'm seeing myself, as you know, I'm no longer playing background music at the back of a Cuban restaurant, and like people is paying tickets and remembering my name and finding me on social media. So I'm very grateful. Sometimes I can do that as a band leader, and I'm very grateful to that, because if I can have another woman in my band, I would definitely do so. And that's giving me some troubles with my male friends who are very dear to my heart. But it's like, we have to do it, you know, because it's like, I want that representation in my music. I want that sound in my music. We cannot keep doing like, I only care about the music, because I don't. There is a community behind it that I want to represent. I cannot come here talking about this, and then you go to my records and there are no women in my, you know, it doesn't make any sense. So I'm very, like, sometimes it's not possible, because so many of us are right now in band leading positions, which I love. If I call, that's why I ended up talking to Ivana, because she was free. Ivana is a drummer that also did both of the programs. And when she told me, yeah, Camila, I'm free, I was like, yes. Getting Ivana free is not very easy. And finally, I can count with Ivana, I can count with Veronica Lee, and I can count with people, but sometimes it's not possible. And of course, influence the music. And I'm happy when I have the opportunity to create that community with my gigs. And I'm also very grateful when that community is taking care of myself. Like last week, I was on tour with this Canadian trumpet player. Her name is Rachel Therrien, and she has a Latin jazz project because she studied in Cuba. And again, I'm so happy, and we are there. There is this sisterhood, you know, because finally it's not only Camila on a male band, it's not only Rachel, it's Camila and Rachel, and we are trying to see how can we really make this like an intentional statement, you know, where we are taking care of each other's music. And again, this is not only happening with women. I'm very grateful of my Cuban community in New York, because it have given me a space to grow, and they keep me employed when I can't afford to be only a band leader. Like, the Cuban community is really a source of support. And right now I'm solving for very talented piano players, like highly virtuoso people. And the fact that it's like, Camila, I want you to do my gig, you know, that trust, I don't know, it really, I'm very grateful. And again, those band leaders are trusting me to bring what I have to their bands. So the work is changing, I think.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of what you said, because traditionally what has happened is women had to play with each other because there was not space for them to play with the male groups. So you ended up with these all-women groups, which made people like Mary Lou Williams and myself not want to play with other women because we felt, you know, pushed off to the side, or ghettoized, or whatever words you want to use. And now we have to reframe how we think about playing with other women. But the idea of our institute and the Next Jazz Legacy program is to involve, you know, men in the program. And I was surprised, actually, at Berklee when so many young men wanted to join the institute, because they too were tired of some of the hyper masculinity in the music, and they didn't want it was performative for them, you know. So our institute has, you know, we try to keep it at 50-50 because there's so many more male students studying jazz than women at the college, and in general, it's hard to keep it 50-50. We just did a big concert with all of our groups, and there was, you know, 2 groups out of the 10 groups that we have, 10 ensembles. There was 2 of them that didn't have the 50-50 or didn't have a balance of women. They had a couple of more guys than women, or 1 more. But for the most part, you know, we try to keep that kind of balance. But involving, you know, these young male musicians has been pretty eye-opening because they're rejecting some of these stereotypes as well. And, gender equity is, what we think about, so that this feels balanced. And we do not ever talk about or do something that says women in jazz, because that feels like it's, siphoning women. And I just think that that's really an important thing to look at, the history of why women had to become band leaders too early, because they didn't have these apprenticeships. This is why we started the Next Jazz Legacy program. And, there's a grant of $10,000 that's given to the emerging artists, but it's also given to the band leader that's going to hire them over the year's time. And so, also conscious of who we're giving the money to, even, the creative, we have, the apprenticeship, and we have a creative mentor. So the apprenticeship is important because it's, jazz is an apprentice art form. You have to learn on stage. So I noticed that there were so many mentorship programs, but nobody was hiring, these women. So that's why I created this one, where apprenticeship was the main thing. And then creative mentorship is another part of it, and then business mentorship. So Camila, as she mentioned, was with Miguel Zenon, and then she had a creative mentorship with Helen Sung, and then business with Alicia Mack from IMN, an agency. And so we try to balance. So I even with that, I try to create balance. Like if you have a male apprenticeship, then I want your creative mentor to be a woman, and vice versa. If you have a apprenticeship with Liz Wright or whomever, I pull it up because I can never remember all the people that were involved. But if anybody's interested, if you look up Next Jazz Legacy online, you'll see the work that this has done. But we have 7 emerging artists a year. We're funded for 6 years, so we have 2 more years left. So that's what's the math. So 7 a year times 6, 42 emerging artists will have been affected by this. But also there'll be 42, or sometimes there's a couple of people have doubled up. So there'll be probably 35 apprentice, at least 35, and creative mentors and business, because I keep trying to make it different every year so it's not repetitive with the mentors. So when you look at that, that's now, if it's 35 to 40 times 7, that's like over 200 people, that have been affected that aren't even the emerging artists, plus the emerging artists. So it creates another ripple in this ecosystem that we were talking about.
Thank you for that. And yeah, please. Yeah.
One last thing, we've been very binary on this thing with the men and the women and blah, blah, blah. But, I had this pantheon. I used to say, in terms of pianists I had heard live and who I shook hands with, Ahmad Jamal, Herbie Hancock, these were the gods to me. But I lived in the Bay Area for a while, and one night a pianist named Jessica Williams played. And I was like, I have someone I can add. This is how extraordinary Jessica Williams' playing was. And Jessica Williams was a trans woman. But I found that out a decade after I heard that concert. So FYI, that's out there in jazz as well as an important factor, is that the spectrum exists, not just so binary.
Right. I just want to add to that, yes, our program, I should have said that too. Our program is for women and non-binary artists, and we say women and non-binary, and we don't say trans because we're considering trans women, and our institute as well. And we've had quite a few trans and non-binary students, which is teaching us, teaching a lot of the, even the guest artists that we have come through have to start respecting pronouns. And, I think Berklee was probably the last school, at least in Boston, that even addressed this issue of pronouns. I was going to other schools in the area, Emerson and others, where this was being talked about, before a class, before a presentation, and I was like, Berklee's, kind of behind with that. So this is also some of the work that our institute is doing, trying to, help, because there's so many kind of old school jazz musicians teaching in these programs, and it's very difficult for them to sometimes make those adjustments. But one thing I also want to say about that is we have had a couple of trans or non-binary students, and one trans student I'm thinking about in particular, that once this person realized they were trans because they didn't get the support that they were looking for when they were a female musician, and when they got to high school, said, oh, this would be easier if I were a male musician. I'll get, support from the band instructors, and they became trans. So when they entered Berklee, they were trans male. And then when they got in our institute, took a semester off, to think about it, and then, just kind of talk to their family, and came back female, which was assigned at birth, because she then realized that she didn't need to be trans, and there was a space for her to just be herself and be supported. So I felt like that was a really interesting example of how gender can affect our choices and what we do based on how other people are treating us. And if, another reason was she didn't want to get hit on, and didn't feel like she had the agency to even address these things with people of authority.
Absolutely great. Thank you for those insights. I mean, the takeaways are quite plenty on this panel, and also, the imagination or the imaginings. I think we are able to take calls at this point. I mean, not calls. I'm a radio person. Forgive me. We will definitely take questions at this time. There were 2 videos that we were meant to play, to contribute to this discussion. So if we do get a chance, we'll do that.
Maybe when we're done, if people are leaving and talking. Her video,
and
though,
there's food too.
Mine doesn't need to be played, but we definitely want to hear hers.
Okay. I mean, we can do that.
And we have a microphone for everyone.
She has a question.
Yeah. Yes, Maya has a question over there.
Come on, Mike. We want to hear from you.
Well, just wanted to say thank you so much for you all for coming here, and Anthony for being here. This is such an incredible conversation, and Kwesi and Chris for putting this on. And as I was listening, I was kind of moved to ask you all a little bit about some of the resources for critiquing patriarchy that maybe we already have coming from within the music. In other words, whether it was fully realized demographically yet or not, there's still so much critical thinking that we as musicians and listeners have learned from the music. And kind of wondering what are some of the ways in which men have contested patriarchy as part of their contestation of racism within the music, and where can we locate that in the sound? It kind of makes me think of Ornette Coleman, for example, reacting against some of the chauvinism of his peers, and like how that gets encoded stylistically in the sound. I remember the first time I heard Lonely Woman as a young musician, I was actually working at a bookstore, and I started playing it over and over and over again until the neighbors had to come in and say, like, you really need to stop playing this for 6 hours. But, there's no women, there's no women on that track, but it feels like there is something that they're breaking out of in that recording. The fact that it's not about, Ornette Coleman solo and then Don Cherry's solo. It's not about whose solo it is at any one time, and that there is this kind of radical egalitarianism that is a throwback to the earlier forms of jazz, interestingly, with that kind of radical collectivism. So that's just one example that springs to mind, but I wonder if your work, there are other moments where you feel like the music itself is also pushing us past those patriarchal structures.
That's a great question. We need more examples for sure. I love the one that you just cited. Well, there's some scholars, male scholars, that are very astute on this topic and have written maybe not books about, but have talked about, like Robin D.G. Kelley, who's a self-proclaimed feminist, and he talks about Thelonious Monk in that way. And as maybe he didn't call himself a feminist, but I think Robin, views Thelonious Monk as a feminist, and could probably would tell you much better than me how he feels that comes out in Thelonious Monk's work. Guthrie Ramsey, who understands this topic very well, and then of course writers like Sherry Tucker, Nicole Rustin, Angela Davis, Farrah Jasmine Griffin, Tammy Crenotto. There's so many books and people that talk about this. Sherry Tucker being, to me, the quintessential jazz scholar on this topic. But as far as other artists and how it comes out, I mean, for me, Wayne Shorter was, he was all about gender justice before we actually had terminology for it. He, definitely made a statement by how many women he hired. He hired me when I was 21, and I always say it was before I was ready. There were 14 drummers that auditioned, very established drummers. Most were very established, that auditioned the same day I did. But he saw something in me, and so it's about seeing this potential. I'm sure he knew I wasn't ready, but he knew also that I would, through this opportunity and through his mentoring, in a sense, an apprenticeship with him, I would be ready, I would get ready, and sometimes that's the thing, people expect women to come fully formed, and they don't with a lot of the young, male musicians that they hire. So that's what's really a beautiful thing about Wayne Shorter, because we have to do better at seeing the potential in people that have not had the same opportunities. Let's see, who else? I don't know, there's just a lot of people that have, I feel, Danilo Perez, for instance, he has a piece called Beloved, which is for Toni Morrison, and similar to how you spoke about Lonely Woman, I feel that kind of same sentiment with this piece of his for Toni Morrison. So anyway, I think that's a great comment, and I think that we need to look for more of that work, and also challenge so many of the male leading men in jazz to pull that type of work out of themselves. Also, there are people like Christian McBride that is consciously trying to hire more women with working with Nicole Glover and Savannah Harris and different situations, and other Kenny Barron, he was doing the same thing. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm trying to remember what we said. Would you please go ahead? Okay.
Hi. This is wonderful, and I wish I had a pencil and paper to take down some names that are getting dropped every now and again. I'll try and catch up later. In a way, I have a question that's sort of like the opposite end of Maya's. I'm interested in maybe some periods earlier in jazz where there were evolutions or devolutions, perhaps in the opposite direction. So I've read a number of anecdotes and interviews that jazz pianists, male pianists in the 20s and 30s, talked about being the piano in jazz was stigmatized as a kind of female instrument, and their masculinity was even suspect a little bit. And so it'd be interesting to know, like, in terms of the musical influence, whether that led to particular ways to reassert masculinity in the piano, or whether you see that kind of thing happening. I'm also interested in what happened with all those all-female big bands during the war, where, among other things, there was a recording band and shellac shortage, so they didn't get recorded. But what happened to all those people? Is there a kind of project that sort of shows how some managed to keep a career going? It sounds like with women factory workers that they just went back to the home or something. But has that story been sort of researched and told?
I don't know if it's actually, that's a great suggestion. People need to research it more. But I do feel like, and I've often said, that when the men came back from war, the women just either went back home or went out on their own and didn't make it, So that I think there's a lot of stories there about people in their struggles for fighting for this newfound freedom. Because I don't know, how do you were not acknowledged, and you were maybe in the home or whatever you were doing, and then all of a sudden you have these opportunities and you're playing in these big bands and you're touring the world, or at least the United States for some of them. And then how do you just go back? Because I mean, if I got it, I said if, but when I got a taste of all that, I can't imagine, going backwards, right? So those are those stories are really interesting to me, and I have not heard enough about them. But I just feel like what you're talking about also is related to kind of this fight and struggle for freedom that was, whether you're talking about the civil rights era or before, it was very male-centric, right? I mean, there's so much misogyny in these struggles. Women's voices were not heard, and they were, supporting, right? Unless you had the exceptions, like Angela Davis. So it was the same, kind of thing. There were so many women that were doing this work. We know about, of course, Fannie Lou Hamer and some of them, but for the most part, the men were the central figures. So it was the same thing with jazz. The men were, through, working toward this freedom through their art, and not asking about women's contributions and women's desire for freedom as well. So I think that that's such a big part of it going the other way, seeing this freedom struggle in jazz, which basically birthed these different iterations stylistically of jazz. And so you got this heavy, like you said about the piano. Of course, if you're playing with John Coltrane, you're gonna, so McCoy developed this very heavy style, right? But it's funny, even McCoy's wife, who's a dear friend of mine, would talk about Coltrane and his influences, and how Naima, his second wife, was like a muse for him. And she was like, he didn't know anything about astrology and all of that until he met Naima. So these stories, when I was young, stay with me about why these things are the way they are. And I'm like, how dare somebody feel that, women can't actually express this desire for freedom in the music as well. So I'm with you. I feel like this is something that should be a dissertation turned into a book and a study, about what happened to the women in the big band. There is a film on the Sweethearts of Rhythm, and they touch upon that. I can't remember the name of it, but if you look, there's only one documentary on the Sweethearts of Rhythm. So if you look that up, they definitely touch upon it, and you see, because they're in their houses interviewing them, you see kind of like, what happened, they're not celebrated. A few came through, Carlene Ray, who played with Mary Lou Williams, a few kept going that we heard about, but she was not a household name, but her husband, or because she's Catherine Russell's mother, and her husband was Louis Russell. So also that's the other thing. You had so many women that were married to or with these great male musicians that got overshadowed. And that's a whole story and dissertation as well.
That's still for the part of the much work that needs to be done. I'm sorry if I'm leaving anyone out, but I think in wrapping up, I believe that these conversations are meant to remind us that we are here to check ourselves and check each other, because we are here to navigate this world with one another, not as individuals. So in our practice, in our work anywhere, I find it important that we remember this, so that in the future maybe we don't focus much on reminding ourselves, but maybe more on doing. But thank you very much for a great conversation, and it can continue while we're having lunch. Thanks.